So imagine being such a Star Wars nerd that you have built an entire curriculum off of a galaxy far, far away, and you use this to teach middle schoolers about literature and storytelling. But meanwhile, your own kids really just aren't all that into Star Wars. In this week's episode, I am actually hanging out with Craig Dickinson from Reading Between the Reels, and this guy is a Jedi Master when it comes to turning Star Wars into a super effective teaching tool. He has figured out how to use those epic storylines and unforgettable characters to grab even the most literature-averse kids' attention. He's turning Shakespeare and narrative structure into something as thrilling as a lightsaber battle. Maybe. Let's be real about it. But anyway, at the same time, his own kids have basically moved on from Star Wars. They aren't nearly as into it as he is. What's that like for Craig? We'll be diving into the tricky bits of introducing this galaxy far, far away to a new generation and how to keep that Star Wars magic alive. So expect some laughs, some aha moments, maybe a fresh way to think about sharing your love of literature, all thanks to the Force. Get ready to use the Force for good and maybe even for homework. This is Tatooine Sons.
Welcome to Tatooine Sons, a Star Wars podcast, the only fan podcast to name a canon Star Wars creature and to be endorsed by the writer and director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson. Get ready to explore a galaxy far, far away, across the generations. Here is your host, David the Bowtie Jedi Guy, along with his special guest, the host of Reading Between the Reels, Craig Dickinson.
For a lot of us dads, Star Wars is our first cinematic love. You saw Empire back in the theaters at a really young age. What are you what are your earliest memories of that experience? How do you think seeing that on the big screen kind of shaped your lifelong relationship with the Force?
Oh, yeah. I was 4. My brother was 2. And I can't imagine taking a 4 and a 2-year-old to any movie at this point. I remember my parents being excited about it and saying, "Hey, we're going to take you to this Star Wars movie." And I didn't know what that was at all. And I remember 2 things about the movie. I remember the Battle of Hoth because, I mean, that's just so epic and there's just white everywhere. I remember the white more than I do anything else. And I remember having some very serious discussions as a 4-year-old trying to figure out how Darth Vader had died on Dagobah and then came back later. So, I mean, adults struggle with that scene. Imagine,
what happened?
Kindergarten age children trying to figure this out. Was he a robot? I don't know what happened there.
That's
yeah,
funny.
no, I was exactly the right age by the time Jedi came out. I mean, I was end of my first grade year and had by that point collected the figures and the ships and had seen the original film because they re-released them in the theaters. And I also remember seeing A New Hope for the first time after having seen Empire. And wondering why these people didn't know each other. That was a weird, I remember very vividly, but Han, Luke are buddies. Like, how does this work?
Very Star Wars thing to do to watch those out of order, right?
Right? Yeah. And then, like I said, cool. Jedi came out at the exact right time. And that's actually my favorite Star Wars movie.
That's awesome. So the Ewoks were never an issue for you because you were you were the demographic for the Ewoks.
I was 7. Yeah, exactly.
I had a wicket lunch pail, right?
Yeah. Loved it. I'm super excited. Loved the whole Jabba sequence. Yeah. So, yeah, as a kid, that was cool. Right in my wheelhouse. The Ewok movies, shortly after that. So, yeah, no, they catered to us pretty hardcore in that demographic right there. So,
that's funny. So, Empire's of the original trilogy, it's clearly the darkest of the 3 movies. With it, was your did that impact the way that you viewed Star Wars, or was it just something that because you're so little, it was just fun for you and you were just kind of into the cool lightsaber battles and spaceships and aliens and creatures and then later on kind of changed your perspective as you grew into the saga more?
Oh yeah, I mean, I got the whole "I am your father" moment that would have flown completely over my head. I had no idea what that was, but I do remember. I remember not liking Lando. I think we kind of just lived with it, I don't even know if I saw it again before I saw Jedi. But I remember knowing the story. I do remember that, and I still have it somewhere. The tape, the audiobooks they used to do back before home video was a big thing. So I knew the story really, really well. All the major beats of that. So I'd listen to it. I knew that, and that kind of grew my knowledge of the story. So I knew the story. I was waiting for, is Darth Vader really his? That was where I was at. Like, is it really his dad? Mm-hmm. And I remember, like, Lando's a bad guy. I don't like him. He was mean to his friends. That being a very strongly held opinion by little me. So it's funny how we have these really intense memories of these movies that we really only saw like the one time, right? Because home video wasn't a thing. But we had the lived experience with the action figures.
It didn't come out on streaming 45 days after the movie was in theaters, right? And you could watch it on Disney Plus on loop, right?
Yeah, but we talk about it, right? You talk about it with your friends, and so you kind of recreated those moments in that way.
Yeah, I didn't see any of the original trilogy in theaters until the special editions. Because my family just didn't go to movies. It's funny. I joke. People ask me all the time, what was my first movie in the theaters? It was Star Trek, the motion picture on Christmas Day, 1979, which is probably why I'm a Star Wars fan.
That would do it.
That was a weird first experience in the theater.
For sure.
As a 4-year-old. But yeah, I mean, Star Wars for me was the books that I got from the library, and I would check them out repeatedly over and over again, right? And I remember, and watching it on HBO. So I remember A New Hope, Star Wars before being on HBO, and I'm watching that over and over and over and over and over and over again, falling asleep during the Tatooine scenes, and then waking up later with it. That was my Star Wars experience. But then I clearly remember my friends down the street getting a copy. I don't remember how they got it. It was before I saw Empire. They got a copy of Empire that they recorded, or got a VHS. I don't remember where they found it. It must have been on TV or something, and they recorded it. And watching me watch the I Am Your Father, because I didn't know it. I didn't know that scene. And so them like sitting there waiting for me to react to that scene, and then getting the books of Return of the Jedi and reading it. But then for me, they had told, I had it in my head that Anakin was like a twin brother of Darth Vader. And I mean, I had this whole mythology around Star Wars that didn't exist from playing with my friends, right? Because we would play Star Wars in the backyard with broomsticks, like a broom boy was our life
exactly.
with it, and make up our own mythologies and our own characters and all that kind of stuff. And you're like, I mean, Star Wars and mythology is a big part of your world because of what you guys do in the classroom and all that. You're a board certified teacher and all of that. Give me a peek into how you use Star Wars, A Galaxy Far, Far Away, with your students and your curriculum and the projects that you do with that.
Sure. So the shorthand way of explaining it is I treat it like it's a novel study. And that's kind of how I have to, because I've had to justify it over the years. Like, you guys are just watching movies or what have you. It's like, no, we're doing a serious deep dive into not only the narrative aspects of these stories, but I also have throughout the year, I kind of seed in lots of video in my class anyway. Like, we watch a couple of Twilight Zones early on, looking at for plot and theme and things like that. And then when we do we read the Hunger Games, and then I watch the movie and we pull out. That's where I begin to teach them some cinematography things about camera angles and some things like leitmotif with music and stuff. And then we do another movie later, and I talk about performances and set design stuff. So that when we get to Star Wars, it's like, hey, we've already done each of these skills independently. Now we're going to do them all together. And they rotate through, so they don't have to do everything at once because there's just too much going on. But it's basically a review of all the things we've done throughout the year. And then they rotate through each, every day, like one group's looking at cinematography, one's looking at sound. And then, but there's also, we have narrative questions at the beginning, open-ended things, and open-ended questions at the end. And they get invested. And it's hilarious because every year, I've seen Star Wars 100 times. I don't care. Like, yeah, but you haven't watched it with me. Or no, Star Wars is dumb. I don't want to watch it. You haven't watched it with me yet. And it depends. Most of the time, it's not, because and with the order, it's an important thing too. We do, a lot of them haven't watched it in the order. So we do episode 4, because you should always start with episode 4, and naturally episode 5. And then the Vader, I'm your father thing happens. And then we go, let's talk about how that happened. And then we go back in time and we go 1, 2, and 3, and then finish with Return of the Jedi. So usually Empire, about halfway through, is when I get a lot of kids suddenly involved because most of them seen episode 4. But we have the Han and Leia romance, which gets some of them. Yoda shows up and he's hilarious and that grabs them. But what I've seen recently is some kids will still be bored through that. They're just doing, going through the motions. But we get to episode 1 and Jar Jar picks up a lot of kids. And then if that hasn't got them, we get to episode 2 and it's usually most of the girls who haven't wanted to watch this, Hayden Christensen, they're 100% in. This year especially was like, oh, he's so hot. Like I've just heard repeatedly that was like, I don't care how you get invested. This is like a lot of what we're trying to do is like build empathy because a lot of these, was it okay to lie to people for certain reasons to try and shield them from stuff? That's one of the big questions we ask. But if I just have to get you you're hooked into the relationship aspect, I've still got you and you're still going to go in the journey and you're going to see him fall and you're going to feel a certain way about that. So yeah, that's awesome. That's kind of that in a nutshell, a long nutshell, a big nutshell.
Why did you pick Star Wars to kind of have those kinds of conversations?
So a couple of things, but I didn't start this. My first year I didn't do it. I wasn't brave enough to try and use Star Wars in the classroom because you're just kind of like, you're kind of white knuckling it and you don't really know what you're doing.
Right.
And then my second year teaching, I think it was in the fall, honestly, and I think I talked to you a little bit about this off mic. I saw Star Wars: The Legacy Revealed on the History Channel.
Mm-hmm.
Watched that documentary like in a week.
So good.
Like on a Saturday. And I was just blown away by it. I think that's the first time I'd ever heard about Joseph Campbell.
Right.
Maybe I'd heard about it before, but like they explained everything and laid it out. And I was just like, I'm fascinated by this. And you got to be passionate about what you're teaching. And two, like there's legitimate educational purposes I could use for this. Like I could rationalize using this. And I just started building a unit from there. And I Googled a bunch of stuff to see what was out there. And I kind of begged and borrowed and stole from different things and just kind of made it my own. And then that year we watched just episode 4. That's the only one we did. And that was like, and then I think I watched like the first half of Empire because we had like a little bit more time. And then I started thinking, okay, how do I incorporate the prequels? Because I really want to do more. And what I did the first time, and I got really ambitious about it. And I was like, all these scenes that rhyme, like I'm going to show those back to back because that's cool. Right?
That'd be fun. But that's hard work, right?
Well, this is what 2011, right? So this is pre-Disney purchase. Every year I would have kids, the numbers have changed dramatically over the years. Hey, who's seen Star Wars? Who hasn't? And I would have, when I started, like half of them had never seen any Star Wars at all.
Sure.
Which is amazing. Like by now they've seen something, it's The Mandalorian or something else, streaming stuff or whatever. So the issue with this, which sounded great on paper, was that a lot of kids still hadn't seen Star Wars. And so showing them some Luke and then showing them some Anakin, thoroughly confused about the timeline. Had no idea how to do that. So like, I just got to go back to just, let's just go in chronological order. But then I was listening to Full of Sith and Sam Witwer was on there. And he was talking about introducing Star Wars to, he and another friend introduced Star Wars to a third friend. And he talked about the machete order, which is essentially what I use, except for, of course, the machete order cuts out episode 1. And I was like, that's it. That's how you do it. That's how you incorporate the prequels. That's how you show the rhyming. Yeah, you set it all up with 4 and 5, and then you go through and you're like, hey, remember when we saw Luke blow up the Death Star? Check out how he blows up the droid control ship, for instance, right? You remember Luke on Dagobah having visions about, Han and Leia being tortured, and he leaves and he's not supposed to. Here's Anakin having visions about his mom, and he's not supposed to leave, but he does. Remember that? Remember this? Remember that? And so that's not the main thing that I'm doing, but like that's kind of like my carrot for doing it. I'm like, look at this. It all rhymes.
I love that.
And I've just, ever since I've done that, I'm like, yes, I get new stuff out of it every time now too.
That's so cool. You've been involved in the Star Wars community for a long time now. You've done some writing with Kenobi. You've done some amazing things. What do you love most about the Star Wars community?
I think really it's the support, just the community aspect of it. That was, so for me, when the Disney sale happened, I was really excited about it. I mean, one of my first thoughts was, I'm going to get to take my kids to go see a Star Wars movie in the theater.
Absolutely.
Because they weren't born before, before 2005. My son was born in 2008. And I wanted to talk about it. And I couldn't find enough people to talk about it. I had a handful of friends that were kind of into Star Wars. I had a buddy of mine. We went to go see like the 3D release of Phantom Menace and stuff. But like the overall community, I was like, I don't have that group of people. And that's when I started looking for podcasts and online forums, and then just got addicted to it. And so pretty much ever since then, it's like, I have to listen to podcasts, And then, at the same time, I'm doing my Star Wars unit. I hear the thing from, on Full of Sith, and then they asked me to be on the show and kind of talk about what I do with my classroom. And so I came on like 6 times, and like just the last 10 minutes of that show, like 6 times in a row, and just kind of updated those guys on what was happening. I met Dan with Coffee with Kenobi during that time. He reached out like over Twitter and was like, hey, come on and talk about what you do in class. And so that's how we met. And so all these, here's for Dan, burgeoning friendships. Burgeoning is an inside joke for Dan and I, but just kind of came out of nowhere, and then just kept building, and it just kept progressing. And then, there was things like, Ian Desher with William Shakespeare Star Wars was on Coffee with Kenobi talking about, his adaptations. And I was reading, so I was like, this is right up my alley. I'm an English teacher. I love Shakespeare. I love Star Wars. Was reading that, and just, on a whim, sent him a message on Twitter. This is hilarious. I love this book. And he reaches back out and says, hey, if you ever want me to talk to your classes, let me know. Like, what?
It's
okay.
Amazing.
And he did. And he would we FaceTimed him in, and he talked to my 6th grade classes who we hadn't done any Shakespeare, but he just volunteered to do it. And that was amazing. And at the end, he's like, hey, next time let's do it in person. Cool. Next year. And he lives in Portland, Oregon. It was only 3 hours from me. And he brought his family, and they came, and he did a whole assembly, and we hung out for a couple hours. And so, yeah, just this continual, super nice, supportive, everybody's kind of backing everybody. Let me know what you're doing, from retweets to guesting on people's shows to just, sharing, been talking shop, all these things. Just been incredibly supportive.
Love it. And then happens with so many of us, you listening to a bunch of Star Wars podcasts, maybe getting an opportunity to be a guest on them. And the next thing you know, you've got your own podcast, right? And so you guys started, now you started it originally as, what was the name of it? It was Coruscant
Community College.
Coruscant Community College.
Yeah, we got really into that. We had a logo design looked like a, Harvard with the, coat of arms and stuff. And it had in Latin, it was the Imperial Academy is not for everybody. It was pretty funny. What was
the premise of Coruscant Community College? Because obviously reading between the reels has evolved from that.
Yeah, no, totally. So really what it was it was an outgrowth of what I was doing in class, and then my podcasting partner at the time, Matt Leader, we collaborated. He had done Shakespeare Star Wars in class, which I now do. And so I borrowed that stuff from him, and I shared the stuff that I was doing with the overall saga at the end of the year type of stuff. And so we collaborated about that kind of stuff. And we just kept having these conversations during prep. When we were supposed to be, prepping and grading stuff, we were just let's talk about Star Wars. And we'd do that. And we're you know what? We should record this. Let's make a podcast out of this. And so that really just became, let's share what we're doing in class with our audience. So let's break down those movies. Let's talk about, all right, what did you guys see camera angles here? Let's talk about the leitmotifs in Attack of the Clones and whatnot. So it really just became, here's what we're doing in class, and we're going to just do it publicly. And so that's what we did. And then ultimately, the biggest reason that we changed things was, well, one, we were going to run out of Star Wars movies at some point. But even before that, our design, which I'm still very happy with, got taken down off of TeePublic because a cease and desist thing from Disney.
Yes.
Right? We're on the map. They saw us. And it was well, what are we going to do here? This is kind of this is a watershed moment. How are we going to handle this? And so, we talked to Dan. Dan's there again, about, what do we really want to do? And, I always kind of had in the back of my mind, I want to do movies other than Star Wars. Like, oh, yes, I want to do Star Wars. That's how it started. But long term, what do we want to do? And there would be, was it going to be a spin-off show where we can talk about Marvel movies or what have you? Or we can rebrand and expand. And ultimately, that's where we landed.
So tell us more about Reading Between the Reels and kind of how that has evolved from that and what it is now.
Yeah. So we were like halfway through the Star Wars movies when we rebranded, and so we finished those. We had Brian Young on as a guest, which was pretty cool, and we talked about, because he's also he's a teacher now, which is fantastic, and so we got to talk about how he got into film and those kind of things. That was like our first big interview that we had. And then we just kind of started picking at movies that we wanted to talk about. And I just started like, okay, what's going to be trending? What's, if Jurassic Park, like new Jurassic Park movies come out, let's do a Jurassic Park movie and see if we can get, caught up in the algorithm that way. And it was more or less that, or, hey, you know what, this is just a fun movie. I want to talk about it. And we did that for a while. And then this, you guys have done some rejiggering here and there.
Absolutely, all the time.
Right? Trying to be reflective of what you're doing. It's like, how are we going to, what's the best path forward? Because this isn't quite working. I'm like, we're always wondering, what are we going to do next? And that just became a little bit of a burden, just trying to figure out what you're going to do. And you don't want to just be like, I'm going to just try and be trendy all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my goals has always been to try and do evergreen content as much as possible. Because I like, just for myself as a podcast consumer, like I listen to a lot of sports podcasts too, and like, well, there's news that has now made that previous episode outdated. I just won't listen to it. So how do I do that where I can just kind of keep that and come back to it? And so we got close to our 100th episode and started thinking about what are we going to do. And so we had our 100th episode, and that was fun. We just kind of we had a bunch of guests on, and it was just like, well, basically what I did was I ripped off Brett Goldstein's podcast, which is a fantastic podcast. Films to be Buried With. I don't know if you've heard it, but it's great. It's basically tell me about your life through film. Like, what's the first movie you saw, a movie that made you cry, those kind of things. And so had a bunch of guests that we had talked with multiple times. Dan was on there, a bunch of other guys. And then after that, I was like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to basically, it's a 100 episode, perfect time to restart, perfect time to do something new. Let's do series. And so, this was all about last summer when we were kind of figuring this out, and Deadpool and Wolverine had come out, and that was one thing. Like, it brought all these Marvel movies back, to the front. They're like, let's watch Fantastic Four again. Let's watch, Blade. I love Blade. Let's watch that. And so what we decided to do, our first series that we decided to do, was the pre-MCU. So all Marvel before the MCU. And no, we didn't do Howard the Duck, and no, we didn't do Dolph Lundgren's Punisher, but like the modern comic book movie, as much as X-Men gets the credit for it, really starts with Blade in 98. And so was like, let's do deep dives that we did Blade, and then we did X-Men, and we went all the way through to 2007, right up until right before Iron Man, and tried to look at it as through the lens of, what if this was a cohesive universe? Could it work? And most of the time it kind of does, but there are some outliers. But we revisited some things we hadn't seen in a long time, like Ghost Rider, X-Men 3, some of these ones that were kind of a burden to get through. But it was still fun because we're
that's
like,
the next movie on the list.
yeah, we gotta do it. We gotta do it. And so we finished that, and that was a lot of fun. The first half of that was great. The second half, you got Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer is the last one. You got Spider-Man 3, X-Men 3, Ghost Rider, as I said. That's a little bit of a slog. But now, what I really wanted to do is we're going through the films of Christopher Nolan. Huge Nolan fan. So we've gone through, and a lot of my podcast partners, Justin and Corey, have not seen some of the early ones. So when we did Memento and those, they hadn't seen it. Insomnia, they hadn't seen it. And then we did, of course, Batman Begins, and then we're through The Prestige. So those have just, as if we're going from some of these movies are good to maybe great, like X2, Spider-Man 2, to some ones that are not so good. Nolan's just banger after banger after banger.
Every single time. Yeah, Nathan's favorite director of all time is Christopher Nolan. He loves everything Christopher Nolan does. He knows like his favorite, like both of Sam and Nathan. Sam's favorite movie of all time is Interstellar. Nathan's favorite movie of all time is Inception. With that, so yeah, those are fun. You know, your students are your kids in a lot of ways. Because my mom was a teacher, I understand that, and I know that's the way you feel. But there's so many themes like family, and I know that those, your family and your kid, we talked earlier, your daughter's, teenager and all of that. You've got your own kids. How does Star Wars, how has it been seeing your kids experience Star Wars in this new era, and really there's two eras that they've experienced it in, right? Mm-hmm. You've got the sequel trilogy era with the films and Rogue One and Solo and that era. And then we've had the post sequel trilogy era, which has been just primarily Disney streaming service content with it. What's it been like watching Star Wars with them in that era?
So, initially the sequel trilogy, they were excited about that. I think the first, they were still kind of young when Force Awakens came out, but they saw Last Jedi in the theater, saw Solo, and they saw Rise of Skywalker, and they were excited. They like going to the movies, period, and they enjoyed those stories and got some of the figures, and like it was big. I missed the action figure line so much. Like that was a big thing me and my son would do. He was still pretty little because like the movie would come out in December, and then like right before spring break, it seemed like it was always right on spring break. So I had the day off. Like they'd drop the Blu-ray release, and there'd be a whole bunch of action figures that would come out. And so we'd go and just go to Target and load up a bunch of that. And so that was some of my best memories from that. But as they've gotten older, they've kind of stepped away from that, and they're kind of just doing their own thing. And I'm just kind of like, well, maybe that's not for you as much. My daughter has mentioned recently, she's like, some of these movies I've only seen once. I'm like, oh, okay, good. There's a door. Let's walk through that a little bit. So I think I'm going to probably start with episode 1 with her and kind of go back through and do some of those. But I will say that we did watch Ahsoka together because they had watched about half of Rebels when it was on. Okay. We had watched that, and then I was like, well, you guys, you have to finish Rebels. We have to watch that. And so I didn't watch it all, but I kind of picked and choose which
different arcs and things.
Yeah, you got to watch this, you got to watch this. And then we got to the end, of course, and they're like, all right, now you're ready to watch Ahsoka, which is kind of Rebels season 5. But because I loved Rebels. That was one of my favorite Disney things that they've done. So I think that was probably the last thing that they were fully invested in. We watched The Mandalorian the first couple seasons, and then they've kind of petered off. I haven't really watched a lot of that stuff, but yeah, I'm kind of stepping back and letting them, if they get interested, come on with that. My daughter loves.
What's that like for you? Because Star Wars is like, you talk about it. It's a big part of who you are, right? It's your fandom, and I know that there's been a lot of reasons that people have sort of kind of have different mixed feelings in the Disney era about Star Wars. But with our kids, for me, watching with Sam and Nate brought me back into Star Wars and changed my perspective on it. Rebels is our thing. I literally just finished a rewatch of Rebels this weekend with Nathan. And we finished it up over Father's Day, and it was awesome. But that's what brought them into Star Wars. And I think part of the connection for them has been this podcast has sort of forced them to stay engaged with it. But why do you feel like kids are some kids? It's not grabbing them the way that it did with us. Is it just too much? Is it too many choices?
I think so.
Of that.
Yeah, on the one hand, there's so many entry points, which is great. And that's one of the last things I do after we finish the 6 movies. We only watched the 6, although this year I also showed them Rogue One because Andor had just finished, and I haven't seen Rogue One in a long time. And then I go through and like, hey, here are the other things that if you're interested, you can pursue. And not all, as an English teacher, I obviously here are the books that you should read this summer. And I have a bunch of those in my classroom, and like, hey, read this kind of stuff. But I do think that there is almost too much stuff, or it can be a little bit overwhelming to do that. So
Yeah.
And as far as my own kids, I think my experience with Star Wars right now is kind of unique in the fact that I'm guaranteed to watch episodes 1 through 6 every year, 5 times. So I don't have a whole lot. I don't have a whole lot of motivation and or desire to watch
it outside of that,
to watch it
or to talk about it anymore.
It's like for 5 weeks or what have you, it's going to be living and breathing in those movies pretty intensely during that time. And so yeah, it's kind of like, for me to actually have the excitement to do that, I kind of have to have a break. Because by the time I get to the end, I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to finish this already. Even though, again, Jedi is my favorite movie, and that's the last one we watch. But I will say, watching those movies, I'm going to say this as positively as I can. Those movies have held up. Even the prequels have held up so well and better than some of the newer stuff. I'm going to put it that way.
Sure.
At least I think, because, and again, one of my biggest thrust with this is the mythology, right? Is looking at the Chosen One and the rise, fall, and redemption of Anakin Skywalker. For me, that's the central thing of Star Wars that really gets me. That's why I love Jedi. You get that last bit in the in the throne room with the Emperor and Vader and Luke. That's my favorite moment. Luke throwing away his lightsaber. I'm a Jedi like my father before me. That's my all-time favorite Star Wars moment. So anything that pulls from that, or detracts from that, I'm less interested in.
I know that when The Acolyte came out, I think you and I even connected a little bit and talked a little bit about it, that one of the challenges that I had with The Acolyte was there was no clear antagonist. There was no clear protagonist. You really couldn't figure out who the good guys were and the bad guys were in it, with it. And that's one of the things with Star Wars that, especially in the originals, the first 6 movies, the Lucas era of Star Wars, that wasn't the same. Like you clearly knew what was going on with good guys and bad guys, with it, which is why Anakin's fall is so impactful, because you see him go from good guy to bad guy, very, very clearly, with that. Do you feel like that's part of one of the challenges that's happening in this new era, is this graying of the morality tale within Star Wars?
No, definitely. I mean, I even think of it in terms of like the beginning of Rogue One, where Cassian, kills the guy so he can get away. Like justifiable, I think, but it's also like, wow, we've never seen a good guy do that, right? This guy we're supposed to root for. And I mean, that is a thing too, that especially when we get into the prequels, when I'm talking with my students, is we talk a lot about, are the Jedi this, they set themselves up as this moral authority, but are they really that? Are they infallible? And so clearly they're not. Like, we talk about, well, why can't they have relationships? We talk about, like, they're overzealous in this kind of thing. They're actually afraid. They're not bad guys though, right? They're misguided. They're full of pride. It's, it's the hubris, which, it's a Last Jedi thing that you get. Yes. They allowed themselves to be, they got deceived or whatever. And then were full of pride and they let this happen. So they had this tragic flaw, but they're not bad guys. And to me, that's an important distinction.
I've been thinking a lot about the Rise of Skywalker recently, which is weird. But anyway, just based on everything in the Rise of Skywalker feels like an overreaction to me.
Yeah.
An overreaction to the death of Carrie Fisher, an overreaction to the struggles of Colin Trevorrow's Book of Henry release and pulling him out, an overreaction to The Last Jedi, of course, and some of that, an overreaction to Solo's box office, which was a mistake of their own. That had nothing to do with the movie as much as it did with, very little to do with the movie and more to do with timing and marketing from my perspective with it. Do you feel like part of the challenge that the story has right now, that Star Wars has right now, is it is a corporate thing, which is very different from what it was with the Lucas era. It's become a business and it's first and foremost a money-making opportunity versus a storytelling opportunity.
Yeah, no, I totally do. I think that you see that as like with, and as much as I love Filoni stuff, that there's so many cameos and Easter eggs and things like that, and this has been talked about ad nauseum, that, the many entry points, but also as I earlier said, like Ahsoka, if you hadn't watched Rebels,
absolutely,
you're in trouble. So yeah, I mean, and I know you guys love Skeleton Crew. That's a really easy thing to get into because like it happens in that galaxy, but you don't really have to know anything to have previously get into that. So yeah, I think that, the part of the issue with, say, like Force Awakens is it is kind of a reboot in a way.
It's a retread of A New Hope. Yeah.
It is that kind of stuff. And we've got, the legacy characters in there, even though we didn't reunite them all together in one scene, which is a tragedy I will never get over. But there's nothing new happening, I think, that's still in the spirit of what the originals would be like. So, I mean, that is a struggle. I mean, I get it. I think that really it is. That's why we had the cameos. That's why we had the legacy characters. That's why we have the touchstones, in Mando to Clone Wars and those kind of things. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's not just a Lucasfilm problem. And that's why we have so many reboots and sequels and everything else, because all these original ideas, that's a gamble.
It's a run home to mama. If things aren't working. I mean, we've got another Jurassic Park movie coming out in just a couple of weekends. It's like studios and they're just like, let's go back to. I saw a great video by Heavy Spoilers about this today, and where Paul talks about the just the death spiral of nostalgia in these franchises and how that's hurting. And I feel like, going back to The Rise of Skywalker, I'm wondering more and more if there was a missed opportunity with the death of Carrie Fisher and everything that happened there to basically reboot the franchise with, not having any legacy characters in the episode 9, and just leaning into a completely new future with that, and they struggled with that. How do you see, when you meet with when you have this experience with your students specifically, and they get engaged? I'm sure many of them, because they're hearing the story different, they're seeing the story so much more in depth than they would watching it on Disney Plus with a phone in their hand and a bunch of things going on in the background and distractions and things like that. They're engaging with the story. They're understanding the story. They're seeing it like literature, like you tried to do with that. What's the experience like for them, not just understanding Star Wars and moving forward, but seeing the mythology of this and how that impacts them? What's that like for these students? And is it similar from year to year, or do you have really dramatic differences with different classes and different students?
No, it's pretty similar. I mean, the fact that they're, as much as I see it 5 times a day, they only see it once, right? And then we're watching about 45 minutes, and so it's very focused on what they're doing. And I think it's I don't know if it's the best way to watch it, but it's a different way to watch it, so that they have to kind of live with the material for a while, and discussion is a huge thing I want them to do. Like, literally take 5-10 minutes. Let's debrief what you thought. Let's talk about these choices that people made. So you're not just zoning out while you're doing it. You have a very active thing that you're doing while you're watching the film. There is no, like, if you put your head down and turn the lights on, that's going to be rough on everybody. Like, it's an active viewing experience. And I think you couldn't do that with necessarily any movie. Like, these movies, they hold up so well. There's some, like, every time I joke about this, every time I watch these movies every year, I pick up new stuff. And sometimes it's just because I'm watching the margins at this point. I'm just going to watch the left side of the screen. Oh, I never noticed this character oh my gosh, the table fell on this guy. I didn't even notice that happened. That kind of stuff. So yeah, I think going deeper into them, into the films, and having them kind of marinate, the kids kind of have to marinate in that stuff. And and sometimes it takes a little while till we get to the end. And that's what I loved about it this year. Like, we finished like a week before school was out, and then we got to watch Rogue One a little bit, and they had some other things they had to kind of do. But they wanted to keep talking about it now that they had the entire picture of the 6 films. So that was, for me, that's the most fun. And that happens almost every year. But I will say one thing that's random every year is which kids have seen it, which kids haven't. And I always, it's kind of fun because it's a lot of times it's the kids that are more introverted that really know Star Wars.
They're all in already.
Yeah. But they become like the rock stars because they're experts and everybody wants to hear what they have to say. And I have to, every year I have to caution them, look, like, don't spoil things for people. You have to just pretend it's like a Christmas gift and you can't tell them what they're getting for Christmas. And I use this example. I had this kid one year, and I don't know how it slipped through the cracks. She didn't know who Yoda was. So when Yoda reveals himself, she freaked out, like in the best possible way. I'm like, how did you not know? I'm like, you don't know, guys, who doesn't know what. And it's way more fun to watch them figure it out than it is to tell them. Give yourself the gift of watching somebody explore this for the first time.
Wow. That's cool because that kind of goes back to what I was saying about my friends watching me watch Empire Strikes Back for the first time. And in that moment of I am your father, and wanting to see my experience. That's cool. That's cool. So you, if you've got this dichotomy in your life when it comes to Star Wars, right? You've got these students, which are a captive audience, which are required for their grade to engage with Star Wars at the end of every school year with you. And you've got that world. And then you've got your kids, which you've been really, really careful to bring them into Star Wars at their own pace and in their own way and not force it on them and that kind of thing. So there's so many people that listen to our podcast who are, most of them are dads that are just dying to have their kids be as excited about Star Wars as they are. And the reality is that's probably never going to happen with it. What's your advice for those dads on how to navigate that balancing act for wanting to share something that they love so much with their kids without forcing it on them?
Well, I can think of two things. I mean, and I've heard you guys talk about this on your show before that, like, hey, it's Father's Day. I'm picking this movie. And so you kind of have, or maybe it's your birthday. You know, hey, the gift that you guys can give me is quality time of sitting here and watching this with me. Like it's once a year, twice a year, maybe. Like it's 2 hours out of your life. I'm not going to bug you about it the rest of the year. Let's just do it here. And the second thing I would say is if you haven't watched the movies, the 6 movies I'm going to just use the machete order for shorthand. Try that and try and go through, because it is a different experience. Because a lot of times, I've seen it, but you hadn't watched it this way, because you will pick up things narratively that you've never seen before.
This is not going to go the way you think.
So much fun. As we kind of pull our speeder up to a stop on this episode, let's recap some of the awesome wisdom that Craig dropped on us. First of all, Craig's Star Wars origin story is seriously cool. It wasn't just about watching the movies. It molded how he teaches. This guy is using Star Wars to get kids excited about literature. I mean, come on. Who wouldn't want to dissect plot points when lightsabers are involved? He's proving that the Force can make anything more interesting, even Shakespeare. Sorry, Bill. Secondly, Craig really hammered home the power of the Star Wars community. It's not just about who's got the best Wookiee roar, though, let's be honest, that's a big part of it. It's about the friendships and the collaborations that blossom when you find your tribe. It is a great reminder that sharing our passions connects us all. And then finally, for all of you dads out there that are trying to pass on the Star Wars torch, Craig gave us some Jedi-level parenting advice. Don't force choke your kids with Star Wars. create special moments, get creative with viewing orders. Just let their love for the galaxy far, far away grow naturally. Trust us, it's a lot more fun this way. Definitely go check out Reading Between the Reels for more of Craig's brilliant film insights. Of course, keep your scanners locked in on Tatooine Sons for all of your Star Wars fix. And of course, may the Force and happy parenting be with you. Remember, I am your father jokes are always acceptable. Always.
Thank you for listening to Tatooine Sons, a Star Wars podcast. Please subscribe and follow Tatooine Sons on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast app. Tatooine Sons regularly publishes thoughtful articles intended to provoke conversation about the larger themes in Star Wars. Go to TatooineSons.com to explore further. And may the Force be with you. Always.
This podcast, website, and social media accounts are not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited and is intended for entertainment purposes only. Star Wars, all names and sounds, and any other Star Wars-related items and properties are trademarks of Lucasfilm Limited and its affiliates. All original content of this podcast and website is the intellectual property of Tatooine Sons unless otherwise indicated.